The afternoon sun streamed through the airport's tall windows as Alex made his way through the bustling terminal, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Just turned 12 last month, he walked with a kind of nervousness that comes with traveling alone for the first time. His favorite blue hoodie and well-worn sneakers made him feel comfortable, even if they didn't quite match the usual first-class passenger look. "You've got this," he whispered to himself, remembering his father's words from their morning call. "Just show them your ticket and be polite." His dad had always taught him that manners could open many doors, though today would test that theory in ways Alex couldn't imagine. The first-class check-in counter stood ahead, its polished wooden surface gleaming under the airport lights. Two attendants in crisp uniforms chatted quietly behind the counter, their conversation stopping abruptly as Alex approached. The taller one, whose badge read Ms. Thompson, looked down at him with raised eyebrows. "Economy class check-in is over there, young man," she said, pointing toward a longer line across the terminal without even glancing at the ticket in Alex's hand. "Actually," Alex started, his voice smaller than he'd hoped, "I have a first-class ticket." He lifted the paper, holding it carefully like his father had shown him. The ticket was pristine. He'd been so careful not to crumple it during his journey to the airport. Ms. Thompson's colleague, Mr. Parker, leaned forward with an expression that mixed doubt with amusement. "Let me see that," he said, taking the ticket from Alex's hands. Both attendants studied it as if examining a counterfeit bill. "There must be some mistake," Ms. Thompson declared, looking around the terminal. "Aren't your parents here? We need to speak with an adult about this." Alex's heart began to race. "My dad bought the ticket. He's meeting me at our destination. Everything's arranged. He said it would be okay." His words came out in a rush, and he could feel his cheeks growing warm. Other passengers started to coo behind him, their sighs of impatience adding to his discomfort. A businessman in an expensive suit cleared his throat loudly, while a couple whispered to each other, staring at Alex. "Listen, sweetheart," Miss Thompson said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "First-class tickets are very expensive. We just want to make sure everything is proper. Why don't you wait over there while we sort this out?" She gestured to a row of uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs. Alex stood his ground, though his legs felt shaky. "My ticket is proper," he insisted, trying to channel his father's confidence. "You can check it in your system. Everything's paid for." Mr. Parker typed something into his computer, his fingers moving slowly as if hoping to find the error he expected. His frown deepened as he scrolled through the information on his screen. "The ticket appears to be valid," he admitted reluctantly, "but there must be some mix-up in the system. Perhaps a computer glitch." He shared a meaningful look with Ms. Thompson. A few feet away, a young woman had started recording the interaction on her phone, while others pretended not to notice the unfolding scene. Alex felt the weight of their stares, the burden of their assumptions. What none of them knew, not the dismissive gate agents, not the impatient businessman, not even Alex himself, was that his father wasn't just any passenger who could afford a first-class ticket. David Chen was the owner and CEO of International Airways, the very airline they were standing in. He had intentionally booked this ticket, wanting his son to experience travel on his own terms, before revealing the truth about their family's connection to the airline. Back in his office, David watched the security feed with a mixture of pride and pain. He saw his son standing tall despite his obvious discomfort, handling the situation with more grace than the adults around him. This was exactly why he'd kept their family's status quiet. These were the real-world experiences that would shape his son's character. The line behind Alex grew longer, and the whispers grew louder. Some passengers started complaining openly about the delay, while others watched with uncomfortable expressions, recognizing the unfairness but remaining silent. "Maybe we should call security," Mr. Parker suggested quietly to Ms. Thompson, but loud enough for Alex to hear. The words hung in the air like a threat, making Alex's stomach twist into knots. Time seemed to slow down as Alex stood there, clutching his backpack strap tighter, wondering if all his excitement about this first solo trip had been naive. He thought about calling his dad, but remembered his words from their last conversation. Sometimes life tests us in unexpected ways. Those are the moments that show us who we really are. Little did any of them know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change not just Alex's life, but the entire airline's approach to customer service and human dignity. The security cameras continued recording, documenting every moment of what would soon become a powerful lesson about prejudice, privilege, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or age. The afternoon sun continued to stream through those tall airport windows, casting long shadows across the terminal floor as Alex prepared to face whatever came next, unaware that his father's lesson would impact far more people than just himself. The situation at the first-class counter was quickly turning into a spectacle. Alex felt his throat tighten as more passengers gathered around, some openly filming with their phones while others pretended to be absorbed in their own travel documents. The air grew thick with tension as Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker continued their efforts to redirect him to economy class. "Look," Mr. Parker said, his patience wearing thin, "we have a full flight today, and there are other passengers waiting." He gestured to the growing line behind Alex, where a businessman in an Italian suit was checking his watch every few seconds. Alex took a deep breath, remembering all the times his father had told him about staying calm under pressure. "I understand you're busy," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "but my ticket is valid. Could you please just scan it and let me board?" A woman in her mid-30s stepped out of line, her kind eyes meeting Alex's. "Excuse me," she said to the gate agents, "but if his ticket is valid, why is this even a discussion? You've already confirmed it in your system." Ms. Thompson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, we're simply following protocol for unusual situations." The way she emphasized unusual made Alex's cheeks burn. More passengers began to murmur among themselves. An elderly gentleman shook his head disapprovingly at the gate agents, while a college student typed furiously on her phone, likely sharing the unfolding scene on social media. "Protocol?" the kind woman challenged. "What protocol specifically requires you to question a legitimate ticket holder?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered. Mr. Parker shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. "Perhaps we should call a supervisor," he suggested to Ms. Thompson, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, please do," Alex said, finding strength in the support of the woman who'd spoken up. "I'd appreciate that." The businessman who'd been checking his watch suddenly spoke up, but not in the way Alex expected. "This is ridiculous," he announced, addressing the gate agents. "I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone with a valid ticket treated this way. What exactly is the problem here?" Ms. Thompson's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Sir, we're just trying to ensure everything is in order. It's unusual for someone so young to be traveling alone in first class." "Unusual doesn't mean wrong," the kind woman pointed out. "And since when is unusual a reason to deny someone service?" More phones came out, recording the scene. Alex could almost feel the viral video being born, though that was the last thing on his mind. He just wanted to get to his seat and call his dad. A young flight attendant hurried over, drawn by the commotion. Her name tag read Ms. Lee, and she carried a tablet in her hands. "What seems to be the issue here?" she asked, looking between the gate agents and Alex. Before either agent could respond, the businessman spoke up. "These agents are refusing to honor this young man's valid first-class ticket, and none of us can figure out why." Ms. Lee glanced at her tablet, then at Alex's ticket. Her eyes widened slightly, but she kept her expression professional. "I see no issues with this ticket," she said firmly. "It's properly issued and paid for." Alex noticed something flash across Ms. Lee's face, recognition perhaps, but she maintained her composure. What he didn't know was that she had just connected his last name to that of the airline's owner, though she chose to handle the situation without revealing this information. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Parker," she said quietly but firmly, "this ticket is valid. We need to board our first-class passengers now." She turned to Alex with a warm smile. "Would you like me to escort you to your seat?" The gate agents exchanged glances, realizing they'd lost this battle. Ms. Thompson reluctantly began processing Alex's boarding pass, her movements stiff and mechanical. The kind woman who'd first spoken up smiled at Alex. "Good for you, standing your ground," she whispered. The businessman nodded in agreement, and several other passengers offered encouraging looks. As Ms. Lee prepared to escort Alex to the plane, he heard snippets of conversation from the crowd. "Can't believe they put that child through this. Someone's going to be in trouble when this hits social media." At least some people still stand up for what's right. Walking toward the jet bridge, Alex felt a mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, lingering anger, and a strange sort of pride. His father had always told him that character shows itself in difficult moments, and he hoped he handled this one well. Ms. Lee walked beside him, maintaining a professional distance but offering quiet support. "You handled that very gracefully," she said as they approached the aircraft door. "Not everyone would have stayed so calm." What Alex couldn't know was that Ms. Lee was already composing a detailed report in her mind, one that would eventually reach his father's desk. She had recognized the CEO's last name, but chose to protect Alex's privacy, handling the situation with the dignity it deserved. As they reached the first-class cabin, Alex finally felt his shoulders relax. The comfortable leather seat seemed to welcome him, offering a safe haven after the storm at the gate. He pulled out his phone, eager to call his father, unaware that this incident would catalyze changes throughout the entire airline. Several rows behind him, the kind woman who'd spoken up and the businessman who'd supported him settled into their own seats, both feeling satisfied that they'd witnessed justice prevail, even if in a small way. The afternoon sun streamed through the airplane windows now, casting a different kind of light than it had in the terminal. Alex looked out at the runway, thinking about how this day had already taught him more than he expected to learn. What he didn't know was that the real lessons about privilege, power, and positive change were still to come. The first-class cabin hummed with quiet conversation as the flight reached cruising altitude. Alex had just finished sending a text to his dad when Ms. Lee, the flight attendant who'd helped him at the gate, approached with a warm smile. She carried a tablet in her hands and seemed to be checking something important. Behind her, the two gate agents, Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker, were doing their final checks before the crew changeover at the stopover. They kept glancing nervously in Alex's direction, whispering to each other when they thought no one was looking. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Ms. Lee asked Alex, her voice carrying the same kind tone she used earlier. As she leaned closer, she spoke more quietly. "I know the boarding process was difficult. I want you to know that's not what our airline stands for." Alex nodded, requesting an apple juice. "Thank you for helping me back there," he said, fiddling with his hoodie strings. "I was getting worried they wouldn't let me on at all." The businessman who had defended him earlier caught this exchange from his seat across the aisle. "Young man," he called over, "I've been meaning to tell you. The way you handled yourself back there was impressive. Most adults wouldn't have stayed that composed." Ms. Lee returned with Alex's apple juice and a warm chocolate chip cookie on a small plate. "Compliments of the crew," she said with a wink. What Alex didn't know was that Ms. Lee had worked closely with his father during company events, though she carefully kept this knowledge to herself. As the flight progressed, more crew members seemed to pay special attention to the first-class cabin. Word had spread among the staff about the incident at the gate, and the video was already gaining traction on social media. Several flight attendants made a point to stop by Alex's seat, ensuring he was comfortable. The kind woman who had spoken up at the gate was seated a few rows behind Alex. She'd been working on her laptop, but kept pausing to observe how the situation was unfolding. During a quiet moment, she walked up to Ms. Lee and had a brief, hushed conversation. "I filed a formal complaint about those gate agents," she told Ms. Lee. "What happened today wasn't right, and someone needs to address it." Ms. Lee nodded professionally. "I assure you, this matter is being taken very seriously," she replied, knowing more than she could say about just how seriously it would be taken once it reached the CDO's desk. Meanwhile, Mr. Parker and Ms. Thompson grew increasingly anxious as they noticed the changing atmosphere in the cabin. Other passengers were giving them disapproving looks, and they'd overheard snippets of conversations about discrimination and poor training. During a quiet moment, Ms. Lee gathered the crew in the galley for a brief meeting. "What happened today at the gate goes against everything our airline stands for," she said firmly. "We need to make sure this young passenger has an exceptional experience for the rest of his journey." Back in his seat, Alex was surprised by how differently everyone was treating him now. It wasn't the special treatment that made him feel better, it was seeing how many people believed he deserved to be there all along. He thought about texting his dad again but decided to wait. Something told him this story wasn't over yet. The businessman across the aisle was on his phone, speaking quietly but intensely. "Yes, I witnessed the whole thing. No, they had no justification. The boy handled it with remarkable maturity. Yes, I'd be willing to make a statement if needed. A young couple a few rows ahead were showing other passengers the video they'd taken at the gate. The footage had already been shared hundreds of times, sparking a heated online discussion about prejudice in the travel industry. Ms. Lee watched all of this unfold while maintaining her professional composure. She knew something none of them did, that this incident would reach the highest levels of the company very soon. She had already drafted a detailed report, carefully documenting every aspect of what had transpired. As the flight approached its stopover point, there was a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The gate agents, who would be departing at the stopover, began their final checks with visible discomfort. They'd seen the social media activity on their phones during their breaks, and the realization of how badly they'd mishandled the situation was setting in. The kind woman approached Alex one more time before returning to her seat for landing. "You taught a lot of people a valuable lesson today," she said softly. "Sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is simply by being yourself and standing your ground." Alex smiled, feeling both proud and exhausted. "My dad always says that how you treat people matters more than anything else," he replied, not knowing just how meaningful those words would prove to be. As the plane began its descent for the stopover, Ms. Lee made one final round through the cabin. She paused briefly at Alex's seat, checking that his seatbelt was fastened. "We'll be landing soon," she said, then added with a knowing smile, "I have a feeling the next leg of your journey will be very interesting." The plane touched down smoothly, and as passengers prepared for the stopover, there was a palpable sense that something significant had happened during this flight. What none of them knew, not the apologetic gate agents, not the supportive passengers, not even Alex himself, was that the next part of this story would change everything. The afternoon sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the runway as the plane taxied to the gate. Alex looked out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. He had no idea that his father was already at the airport, preparing to board for the next leg of the flight, ready to turn this difficult experience into a powerful lesson about leadership, dignity, and change. The airplane had just arrived at the stopover gate, and passengers were stretching in their seats when something unexpected happened. A tall, well-dressed man in a perfectly tailored suit walked onto the plane, followed by several airline officials. Alex's eyes widened. It was his father. Mr. Chen, the airline's CEO, walked down the aisle with purpose, but few passengers recognized him. He wasn't the kind of executive who plastered his face on marketing materials or gave flashy interviews. His power was quiet, measured, and all the more impressive for it. Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker, the gate agents who were preparing to leave the flight, froze in place. The color drained from their faces as they recognized him immediately. They had seen him at company meetings, though they'd never spoken to him directly. "Good afternoon, everyone," Mr. Chen said, his voice carrying naturally through the cabin. "I'm David Chen, CEO of International Airways." A murmur of surprise rippled through the first-class cabin. "And I believe that's my son in seat 2A. Alex couldn't help but grin as his father approached. The businessman who had defended Alex earlier nearly dropped his phone in surprise. The kind woman who had spoken up at the gate covered her mouth with her hand, suddenly understanding the full picture. Mr. Chen stopped beside his son's seat, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "How was your first solo flight so far?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It was educational," Alex replied, causing several passengers to chuckle nervously. The CEO turned to face the cabin, his expression serious but not angry. "I understand there was an incident at boarding," he said. "In fact, I watched it happen on our security feeds." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ms. Thompson stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Chen, sir, we had no idea." He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "That's exactly the point, isn't it? You had no idea who he was. And that's precisely why what happened today was so important." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the passengers who had been pretending to mind their own business were now listening intently. "I deliberately booked this ticket for my son," Mr. Chen continued. "I wanted him to experience our airline as any other passenger would. What I witnessed today showed me exactly where we need to improve." Ms. Lee, who had been standing quietly nearby, stepped forward with her detailed report. Mr. Chen took it with a nod but didn't open it yet. "Thank you for looking out for my son," he said to her. "And thank you to the passengers who spoke up when they saw something wrong." The businessman cleared his throat. "Sir, your son handled himself remarkably well. You should be proud." "I am," Mr. Chen replied, smiling at Alex. "But I'm not proud of how our staff handled this situation." He turned back to the gate agents. "This isn't about punishment. It's about learning and growing as a company." He pulled out his phone and showed them the social media posts that were already going viral. Videos of the incident had thousands of shares, with comments pouring in from around the world. The gate agents looked mortified. "Tomorrow," Mr. Chen announced, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. We're going to implement comprehensive changes in our training programs. This isn't just about today. It's about making sure every passenger is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, appearance, or background." The kind woman spoke up from her seat. "Will there be consequences for the staff involved?" Mr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, but perhaps not the kind you might expect. Instead of termination, I'm going to ask Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker to help develop our new training program. Sometimes the best teachers are those who have learned from their mistakes." The gate agents looked up in surprise. This wasn't the punishment they had been expecting. Ms. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Mr. Chen turned to address all the passengers. "I want to thank everyone who spoke up today. Your actions showed that our passengers often understand our company values better than some of our staff." He paused, looking around the cabin. "This is how change happens, not just through policies and procedures, but through people willing to stand up for what's right." As the Stopova passengers began to deplane, including the shamefaced gate agents, Mr. Chen took the seat next to his son. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Alex nodded, then grinned. "You planned this whole thing, didn't you?" "Not exactly," his father replied. "I planned for you to travel alone, yes, but what happened today? That was real life teaching us both a lesson we won't forget." The businessman leaned across the aisle. "Mr. Chen, I have to ask, why didn't you just tell everyone who you were from the beginning?" Mr. Chen smiled. "Because real change doesn't come from fear of authority. It comes from people doing the right thing simply because it's right." He looked at his son proudly. "And sometimes it takes seeing things through new eyes to understand what needs to change." As the plane prepared for its next departure, passengers were still buzzing with conversation about what they had witnessed. The afternoon sun was setting now, painting the cabin in warm golden light. Alex looked out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. His father's words echoed in his mind. Real change comes from doing the right thing simply because it's right. He realized that today's lesson wasn't just about airlines or tickets or first-class seats. It was about something much bigger, about standing up for what's right, about learning from mistakes, and about turning difficult moments into opportunities for positive change. 2 weeks after the flight incident, International Airways' main training center was buzzing with activity. Mr. Chen stood at the front of a large conference room, addressing a group of airline employees from across the country. At his side were Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker, looking nervous but determined. "The video of what happened to my son has been viewed over 5 million times," Mr. Chen began, clicking through slides that showed various social media posts and news coverage. "But we're not here to dwell on mistakes. We're here to learn from them." In the back of the room, Alex sat quietly, watching his father speak. He hadn't planned to come, but his father insisted that his perspective was important for everyone to hear. "Our company has always prided itself on excellent service," Mr. Chen continued. "But excellence isn't just about comfortable seats or premium meals. It's about treating every single passenger with dignity and respect." Ms. Thompson stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly as she began to speak. 2 weeks ago, I made assumptions about a passenger based on his age and appearance. I thought I was following protocol, but I was really just following my own biases." She paused, gathering courage. "Working on this new training program has opened my eyes to how many subtle ways we can make passengers feel unwelcome." Mr. Parker nodded in agreement. "We've spent the past 2 weeks interviewing passengers from all backgrounds about their travel experiences. The stories we've heard have been eye-opening." The kind woman from the flight was there too. She had been invited as a consultant for the new training program. "Sometimes being a bystander isn't enough. she told the room. "We need to actively stand up for what's right." The businessman who had defended Alex had also sent in a video message, which played on the large screen. "What I witnessed that day wasn't just about one incident. It was about the choice we all have to either speak up or stay silent when we see injustice." Alex watched as his father unveiled the company's new initiative, "Every passenger, every time." It wasn't just a slogan, it was a complete overhaul of their training and operations procedures. "We're installing new feedback systems at every counter," Mr. Chen explained. "We're revising our protocols to ensure they protect passengers rather than profile them. And most importantly, we're changing our company culture." Ms. Lee, who had been promoted to head of customer experience, presented the new training modules. "Every employee will go through this program, from gate agents to executives. No exceptions." During the lunch break, Alex overheard airport staff from other airlines asking about implementing similar programs. His father's initiative was already spreading beyond international airways. Later that afternoon, Mr. Chen invited Alex to share his experience. Walking to the front of the room, Alex felt nervous but ready. "That day on the plane taught me something important," he said, looking at the gathered employees. "It showed me that change can start with one person, but it takes everyone working together to make it last." The training center's walls were covered with new posters showing diverse passengers being welcomed aboard with dignity and respect. Employee handbooks were being rewritten, and even the airline's marketing materials were being updated to reflect their renewed commitment to inclusivity. 1 month after the incident, the changes were already showing results. Customer satisfaction scores had improved, and employees reported feeling more confident in handling diverse situations. The airline had become a model for others in the industry. Mr. Chen invited Alex to his office one evening after school. "Remember when you asked me why I didn't tell you about owning the airline?" he said, looking out at the sunset through his office window. Alex nodded, sitting in one of the big leather chairs. "I wanted you to understand something important," his father continued. "Success isn't just about what you own or control. It's about how you use your position to make things better for others." The office walls now displayed framed news articles about the airline's transformation. One headline read, "How one incident sparked industry-wide change in airline customer service." Ms. Thompson and Mr. Parker had become passionate advocates for the new training program. They shared their story openly, using their experience to help others recognize and overcome their own biases. Their honesty and willingness to learn had earned them respect among their colleagues. The kind woman who had spoken up that day was now a regular consultant for the airline's diversity initiatives. Her experience in standing up for what's right had inspired a new section in the training program about being an active ally. As the sun set over the airport, Alex watched planes taking off and landing. Each one carried hundreds of passengers who would now experience a different, better kind of service, all because of what happened that day. "You know what makes me proudest?" Mr. Chen asked his son. "What?" "That you stood up for yourself with dignity and grace, even when you didn't know you were the owner's son. That's the kind of strength that changes the world." Alex smiled, remembering something his father had told him long ago. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come wrapped in difficult moments. The story of what happened that day continued to spread, inspiring other companies to examine their own practices. But for Alex and his father, it had become something more personal, a reminder that real change begins with how we treat each other every day, in every moment. As they left the office that evening, they passed a new sign in the airport terminal. "Welcome aboard, every passenger, every time." Below it, travelers of all ages and backgrounds moved through the terminal, each one being treated with the respect they deserved. The incident that began with a denied seat had grown into something much bigger, a movement for change that would impact travelers for years to come. And it all started because a young boy stood his ground, a father taught a lesson in humility, and a group of people chose to stand up for what was right.